Okay, Rebecca, here I am. And as Andrew Gibbons, I'm reviewing with you, Rebecca Norton. You'll tell us a bit more about yourself. What we both learned from this week's networking event stroke webinar on and around getting the most from introverts. What did you get from that?
Some fascinating discussions, first of all. I think that's the key. But interesting discussion around, I suppose we centered a lot on meetings, and I think meetings are often a big part of workplaces and stuff. But what was key for me was how important it is to prepare and follow up. So in terms of preparing, sending material out in advance, or at least an agenda or something, because introverts need that time to think and process stuff. Yes, and some structure, knowing what's going to happen, and that was another interesting point. Sorry, I'm going to get off track here already.
My fault.
But that was interesting when somebody mentioned that in the actual event, didn't they? About they didn't know what to expect and how important that is. So I'm going to leave it there at the minute, because I think that was actually quite key as well, is knowing what to expect and how to engage in that space.
Yeah, you're right. Getting the most of introverts was a pretty big, wide title to give things, and so it allowed us to range quite widely. But you're absolutely right. I was a bit shocked by the implication that people were giving that a lot of workplace meetings still happen without any agenda. Well, no, we're here. What should we talk about? Now, people tell me that doesn't happen anymore. I actually know perfectly well that isn't the case, but it seemed to me that was a little more widespread in people's experience in the group on Monday than we might have expected, to the detriment of people who value structure and preparation.
Yeah, and I think actually it would benefit both introverts and extroverts, anybody basically in the meeting, if there is some structure there, because it allows, like I said, it allows the introverts to possibly start thinking of their ideas and what do they want to get out of that meeting, or what do they want to input to that meeting, but also it just gives everybody a heads up, I think, of what to expect. But also I think what somebody mentioned, and that does happen, you're right, not as often as it should do, but I think what happens even less is that follow-up to a meeting, so sometimes the ideas will come afterwards, or you need time to process ideas and think things through, and actually the best thinking might come outside of that meeting. And I don't think that is something that does happen very often, the follow-up, and what are your thoughts beyond this, and that's something that could be done easily.
I've been thinking a fair bit about that specific issue, because when I get into something of interest like this, I delve quite deeply. I find a lot of literature and I go, whoa, all this stuff I didn't know about and I should have done 38 years ago. And you're right. We shouldn't have to make the case for structured meetings. That's been made before. Just do it. What I'm interested in is that all too often, the first idea is not the best idea. The first thought on how to do something better is usually not the best. So I suspect an awful lot of better ideas come from outside the structure put together to initiate them. And that then leads me, and yourself, I know, to think, how much out of meeting follow-up is there ever to say, what have you been thinking about since we talked about this in the meeting? I actually don't think I've ever seen that happen.
No, and like you said, I think sometimes having the discussions in the meeting is a really good place to plant a seed.
Yes.
And to get some initial ideas.
Yes.
But it would be so easy to follow up, say a week later, less than that. I don't know, you'd have to work out.
Not by writing, not a little note, because it needs to be interactive. It needs to have the time invested to say, look, Rebecca, I respect you as a thinking person. I don't think we always get the best of you in the meetings. It's noisy and doesn't suit you. But I'd like to know what you've been thinking about since that meeting on Monday that I could do with knowing. Does that ever happen anywhere?
Never happened to me.
We shouldn't laugh, because we're kind of saying, oh dear, another indication that organizations forever haven't done things as well as they might.
Yeah, and maybe it's just one of those things that hasn't been thought about, and it's the time factor, isn't it? I think this is the other thing, is it feels like a big pull on somebody's time when they're already busy. But saying that, in a longer term respect, does it save time?
Of course it does. And I think the time thing, I just biff into touch. if you haven't got time to do things better, you've got to question what you're spending time on. Simple. It's there's no excuse for not finding the time to do things right, because doing things right saves time.
Yeah, exactly. And it is, you're right, and maybe that's something that people need to start thinking about, is scheduling a second follow-up at the same time.
And maybe only with certain individuals, because the noisy people, you're going to get the same noise from as you heard the first time. And we're not just talking about meetings here. We were considering the broader issue of people with a talent set and of transactional conversations. But meetings is important, because meetings is where I think a lot of the loss of value of introverts is seen. If you're going to get most from introverts, meetings is a good place to start and say, what more can we do that takes my time and is worth the conversations with individuals to get more from that? So I think it's right we talk about meetings a fair bit.
Yeah, because like you said, that I think that's the arena where often you'll see these challenges arising. Yes, in a general workplace, but it's specifically in a meeting where you tend to see the extroverts sort of dominating the meeting and not necessarily engaging those introverts as well.
Well, you gave me the wonderful phrase, silence is the space of the busy thinker, or something around those lines. That's how I'll paraphrase it. And I think too often, whether it's in conversation, in a meeting, or any context, the silence of the introvert is too often assumed to be someone with no contribution, with no ideas. And it's just the opposite. It's just that their ideas are better. It's just that their ideas are better formed. It's just that their ideas are still incubating. So, yeah, I think that's a big takeaway, isn't it? What more can we do to get the most of introverts beyond a structured, organized event afterwards?
Yeah. And specifically drawing on them within the event as well, because I did notice we did attract a few introverts to that event. And there were a couple of them that were not engaging for whatever reason, and it may well have been that they were just listening, or like we've just been saying, thinking. So actively inviting their input, and they were invited to do that.
That's tricky, Rebecca. That's tricky, because the previous event I'd run, I had someone in that room that I know very well. I know his personality. I'm not going to name him. And he was visibly, facially engaged the whole time. He was nodding, didn't say a word for an hour. But I know that person went away with probably more value, because they approached that gathering in their own way, on their own terms, doing things the way that suited them. The load of noisy people saying loads of words like me, who haven't really thought about things.
Yeah.
So I suppose I'm being cautious here. Yes, draw people out, but do it with care. Not, you, quiet person, what have you got to say on this?
No, and I think I can't remember how I worded it now, but it was an invite, not a demand. It was an invite. Do you have anything that you would like to add to this?
And you can decline. You can decline, say nothing.
Exactly. You give them the opportunity to interact or the opportunity to decline. But actually that can make somebody feel valued, even if they don't want to add anything. The fact that they have been asked is really, really important.
I get that, because not to be asked implies an absence of interest.
Yes.
I was really pleased to get an email from someone this morning, won't mention names again, don't see why not, but I won't, to say that as a result of the group we brought together on Monday, a little group of 3 has formed across the Atlantic to share ideas and take it further. That's wonderful, because that's kind of why I want to do these things, to say, let's all get together and see where it takes us, but somewhere more than this would be even better, and that has.
Yeah, and that's the idea, isn't it? I know you called it a networking lounge originally. That was the idea of it, and the more we are willing to listen to and meet with other people, the broader our horizons. It just opens us up to different viewpoints, different ideas. And I think again that's quite important.
I'm with you, and again, taking the theme of incubating ideas, an event like we had with interaction between people is not where learning is formed. To me, that's thoughts. You get thoughts at a time like that. You don't get learning. Learning is a long-term change of behavior brought about by an experience, blah, blah, blah. So learning is about applying behavior. None of that can happen in a forum like that. What you can get is a thought that leads to reflection, that leads to insight, which leads to understanding, which then leads to learning. We talk about learning. Yeah, I've learned something. No, you haven't. You've had a thought. And I think that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get people to have thoughts that they subsequently go away and think more about. And if they're an introvert, they do that. And an extrovert, they'll say, right, did that for 3 seconds, bored, move on to something else.
Yeah, I think it achieved what we set out to do in terms of just airing some different ideas. And I think everybody did take something away from that. I think people did take some ideas away from that, even if it's just making one meeting better, then I think that's successful, isn't it?
I liked something that was said. I like the binary word. I don't like it for any of the reason that it's context. And I think it is possible to look at something like introversion in a binary way. You're this or you're that. And I found myself thinking, no more. It might become learning if I do all that stuff I just talked about. But I found myself thinking, yeah, it's wrong to label yourself an introvert or an extrovert, because that puts yourself in a box and you behave in a certain way that suits how you see yourself. I think it's about situationally, another word we heard, adapting so far as you can. Personality and everything else inhibits too much of a range. It's about behaving appropriately in an introverted or extroverted way, showing introversion or extroversion, however you want to label it, but not just playing the role of the person you are.
No, and you're right. It did come up, didn't it, in terms of we will behave differently in different environments. So there's so much at play. It's not just a case of whether a person is introvert or extrovert. It depends very much on the context, the environment, the people in there, in that meeting or situation. There's a lot of different things. And like you say, I think it's not necessarily a good idea to label things. I think it's, that can lead to very narrow thinking.
I've always found that if you give people a test of any sort and they then say, oh, that's me, this is who I am, and it implies, and I'm nothing else. Because I think what I take away the strongest from what we did this week was it's possible, I feel, to generalize for anyone to become more of what they aren't showing themselves to be. I'm not a naturally introverted person. I feel with an effort, I can play the role of an introvert more often and do it authentically and meaningfully. I will never be that person, but I can use some of the skills I've seen those people use that I don't possess naturally.
Yeah, you're right. And I think because that's something we talked about, isn't it? The different skill sets that introverts and extroverts will bring on a very stereotypical basis. But there's no reason why we all can't practice different skill sets and develop them.
I think we'll end it there, because if we didn't, we're going to go on a long time, and we'd set ourselves a target. He says, glancing at the stop watch on the screen to his left. And I think we covered a lot of good ground. I found it a useful experience. I'm still thinking about it, and that's a very positive thing to do.
Thank you.
Thank you.